Hey y'all, it's time for Chapter 5 of Frindle, The Report. By lunchtime the next day, Nick had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. Seventh period was coming. He was going to have to stand up in front of Miss Granger's class. The eyes of everyone in the class would be glued to his face, and Mrs. Granger's eyes would be cranked up to maximum punch power. He looked over his notes again and again, and the first English dictionary, The Growth of the English Language, William Shakespeare, Words from French and German, New Words, Old Words, New Inventions, Anglo-Saxon words, Latin and Greek roots, American English. It all became a big jumble in his mind. And in his grand plan from the night before, in the harsh fluorescent light of the school day, it seemed impossible. What is it with the clocks in school? When you're planning to go to the carnival after school, the clocks in every class practically run backwards, and the school day lasts for about 3 weeks. But if you have to go to the barber or going shopping for clothes after school, zip, the whole day is over before you can blink. And today, after lunch, periods 5 and 6 went by in 2 ticks. As the 7th period bell rang, Mrs. Granger walked into the classroom, took 4 steps to her desk at the side of the room, flipped open her attendance book, glanced out at the class, and made 2 little check marks. Then, looking up at Nick, she said, "I think we have a little report to begin our class today. Nicholas?" 15 seconds into 7th period, and Nick was on stage. This lady plays for keeps, thought Nick. He gulped, grabbed his crumpled note cards from his book bag, and walked to the front of the room. He stood next to the giant dictionary on its little table, and Mrs. Granger walked to the back of the classroom and sat primly on a tall stool next to the bookcases. She was wearing her blue uniform. Taking a deep breath, Nick began. "Well, the first thing I learned is that the English dictionary—" Mrs. Granger interrupted. "Excuse me, Nicholas, but does your report have a title?" Nick looked blankly at her. "A title? No, I didn't make a title." "Class, please remember to include a title whenever you prepare an oral or written report. Now, please go on, Nicholas." She smiled and nodded at him. Nick began again, looking right at Miss Granger. He said, "The dictionary." A couple of kids thought it was funny, but Nick played it straight and just kept talking. A lot of people think that the first English dictionary was put together in the 1700s by a man named Samuel Johnson. He lived in London, England. He was real smart and he wrote a lot of books, and he wanted all the other smart people to have a good dictionary to use, so he made one. But there were other dictionaries before his. The thing that was different about Johnson's dictionary was its size, first of all. He had over 43,000 words in it. The class made a bunch of noise at this big number. Ooh, and wow, and stuff like that. And Nick lost his concentration. He glanced up at Mrs. Granger, expecting to see those eyes drilling a hole in him. But they weren't. They were almost friendly, in a teachery kind of way. She shushed the class and said, "Go on, Nicholas. That's a fine beginning." Nick almost smiled, but he saw all the kids staring at him, so he gripped his note cards even tighter and jumped back in. The other thing that Samuel Johnson did that was special to choose the words was that he thought were most important and then give lots of examples showing how the words got used by people. For example, he showed how the word take could be used 113 different ways. Nick's report went on smoothly for 12 minutes. Nick was surprised at how easy it was to stand there and talk about all this stuff. At the end of the first 5 minutes, Mrs. Granger had to stop Nick again to say, "Class, it is not good manners to yawn out loud or to put your head down on your desk when someone is giving an oral report." No one in the class cared one little bit about the report, except Miss Granger. Every time Nick glanced up, she was smiling, and her eyes were not the least bit icy or sharp. She was eating this stuff up, listening and nodding, and every once in a while she would say, "Very good point," or "Yes, that's exactly right." But the next time Nick looked up, he saw Mrs. Granger sneaking a look at her watch. 18 minutes gone. Maybe his idea was going to work after all. Time for phase 2. Reaching into his book bag, Nick pulled out the red dictionary he had brought from home, the one most of the kids had, the one Miss Granger said they should use. Nick said, "This is the dictionary that I use at home for my vocabulary work, and I opened it up last night to the very front, and right there I found out a lot about how the dictionary was made, right in this book. So I thought some of the ways would be good as part of my report. It says here—" "Nicholas," Nick looked up. Mrs. Granger got off her tall stool. Its wooden legs made a screech on the linoleum. Heads snapped to attention, and the class was alert again. Mrs. Granger smiled, raised her eyebrows, and pointed at her watch. Nicholas, I think the class should read that at home themselves. Now, John's hand was up in the air, and at Mrs. Granger's nod, he said, But I don't have that dictionary at home, Mrs. Granger. I have the blue one. And several other kids immediately said, Me too. Mrs. Granger tried not to show that she was annoyed. Very well, Nick, but it shouldn't take very long. We have other things to do today. Nick kept his eyes open wide and nodded, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and began to read. Without question, this modern American dictionary is one of the most surprisingly complex and profound documents ever to be created, for it embodies unparalleled etymological detail reflecting not only superb lexicographic scholarship, but also the dreams and speech and imaginative talents of millions of people over thousands of years. For every person who has ever spoken or written in English has had a hand in its making. It was a long article, and the kids were bored to death. No one looked bored at all. Every kid in the room knew now that the period was more than half over, and that Nick's report wasn't just a report. It was one of the greatest time wasters he had ever invented. Mrs. Granger knew it too. She had edged around from the back of the room to the side near the windows. Nick glanced up at her now and then as he read, each time. Mrs. Granger's eyes clicked up to a new power level. After 8 minutes of Nick's best nonstop reading, her eyes were practically burning holes in the chalkboard behind him. There were only 10 minutes left in 7th period. When he took a breath to start the new paragraph, Mrs. Granger cut him off. That's a fine place to stop, Nicholas. Class, let's all give him a round of applause for his report. The applause didn't last long. As Nick took down his book bag and notes and sat down, Mrs. Granger's eyes went back to almost normal, and she actually smiled at him. Although your report was a little long, she paused to let that sink in. It was quite a good one. And isn't it fascinating that English has more different words than any other language anywhere in the world? She pointed at her large dictionary. That one book contains the definitions of more than 450,000 words. Now, wasn't I right, Nicholas? All this will mean so much more to you since you learned about it on your own. Mrs. Granger was beaming at him. Nick sank lower in his chair. This was worse than writing the report, worse than standing up to give it. It was like he was being treated like the teacher's pet, and he had the feeling she was doing it on purpose. His reputation was in great danger, so he launched another question. He raised his hand, and he didn't even wait for Miss Granger to call on him. Yeah, but, I really still don't really get the idea of why the words all mean different things. Like, who says that D-O-G means the thing that goes wolf and wags its tail? Who says so? Miss Granger took the bait. Who says dog means dog? You do, Nicholas. You and me and everyone in the class and this school and this town and this state and this country. We all agree. If we lived in France, we would all agree that the right word for the hairy four-legged creature was a different word. Shein. It sounds like she-in, but it means what D-O-G means to you and me. And in Germany, they say Hund, and so on, all around the globe. But if all of us in this room decided to call that creature something else, and if everyone else did too, then that's what it would be called. And then one day it would be written in the dictionary that way. We decide what goes in that book. And she pointed to the giant dictionary, and she looked right at Nick, and she smiled again. Then Mrs. Granger went on. But of course that dictionary was worked by hundreds of very smart people for many years, so as far as we are concerned, that dictionary is the law. Laws can change, of course, but only if they need to. There may be new words that need to be made, but the ones in that book have been put there for good reasons. Mrs. Granger took a look at the clock. 8 minutes left. Now then, for today, you were to have done the exercises beginning on page 12 in your Words Alive book. Please get out your papers. Sarah, will you read the first sentence, identify the mistake, and then tell us how you corrected it? Miss Granger jammed the whole day's work into the last 8 minutes, a blur of verbs and nouns and prepositions, and yes, there was another homework assignment. And Nick didn't try to sidetrack Miss G again. He had slowed her down a little, but had he stopped her? No way. She was unstoppable, at least for today.